Hey there, my name is Vaughn, and this is the Vaughncast Show. This is a podcast that focuses on mental health, breaking societal stigmas, harm reduction, addiction, and recovery. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, follow the podcast Instagram at The Vaughncast Show, where I post video content from the show. All right, let's get into today's episode. Okay, welcome to the Vaughncast Show. Hope y'all are doing well. Today I have life coach and friend Jule back on the podcast, and we'll be talking about imposter syndrome. I wanted to talk about this topic because I feel a lot of us experience it or go through it without knowing about it. So in this episode, we'll be diving a bit into what it is and how to manage it or how to overcome it. So before we get into all that, how are you today, Jule?
I'm good.
Good. Yesterday I saw the Wolverine and Deadpool movie. Very good. I don't know if you're into that, but I thought it was pretty good and pretty funny.
Well, that's nice. Maybe I will put it on the list to go look. Oh, I think my husband's actually going to go see it next week with his friends. So maybe I'll kind of tag along.
I watched on the computer. I'm not paying for it. Bootleg. But
are you sure you want to say that on your podcast?
I'll take it out. Man, I've said a lot worse things on my podcast, but I'll take that out too. Yeah. So, all right. What is imposter syndrome?
All right. Let me first talk about what imposter syndrome isn't, because I think this is what a lot of people are confused about. So the number one question I get from people is they think it means that you are an imposter. And that is not what imposter syndrome is. And if anything, it's the opposite. So imposter syndrome is the feeling that you're not as smart or as capable as other people think you are. So in a way, it's about like you think you're not going to measure up to their expectations. And you have a fear that you're going to be exposed as some kind of fraud. So you'll be discovered. And then you have this sort of image in your mind that you're going to be thrown out or carted off campus or, somehow rejected from the group. And you think this because you have a compulsive habit of downplaying your success. So every time somebody says that was a good job or, you did so well on this, you probably have a habit of saying, oh, this was nothing, or they only gave this to me because they liked me, or I had connections, I had help. You insert your thing here. But it's constantly sort of what I call giving away or explaining away your success. And people with imposter syndrome most of the time, so again, right, like it's not you being an imposter, it's the fact that despite having all of the track record, you actually have a lot of success, you have achieved a lot. It's the fact that you think that you're still somehow really good at faking it and you're fooling all the people around you.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I didn't realize it was that thorough or those examples. So would that be similar to self-doubt? Is that part of it, or is that something a little different? To where like maybe you just started and you're thinking, oh, I'm not good at this, or maybe you do it for a few years, whatever that is, and you still think you're not doing good at it. Is that kind of similar?
They do share similarities. So this is the other thing that most people tend to be a little bit confused about. So everybody has moments of experiencing self-doubt for sure. Self-doubt can look like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm up to this. I don't know if I'm going to do well at this. And that is totally normal. People will experience that thought on every stage of their journey. But what makes imposter syndrome special is that feeling that you're going to be discovered as some kind of fraud. That's what makes it what it is. along with the other two things that I mentioned, right? It's that fear that you're not going to live up to other people's expectations of you, that they think you're smarter or better than you really are. And it's because you've been in this lifelong habit of saying, I didn't really do this.
Okay. That's a good explanation. I also, for historical context, I looked it up, and I think it was coined in 1978 by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes.
Okay, so I have a couple of things that I want to share here. These women coined the term, right? And so, yes, for all intents and purposes, imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, they are referring to the same thing. You may also hear imposter feelings, imposter experience. We're talking about the same thing every time you hear the term. Number one, like a really big misconception people have, and also for some weird reason people like to argue about this, is as of yet, this is not a medical condition that you can diagnose. It's something that we observe as a pattern of behavior, just like perfectionism. So perfectionism is also something that isn't medically diagnosed, right? But we recognize it when we see ourselves doing it. Imposter syndrome, as of today, is in that category of a pattern of behavior. Now, when I say that people get weird about, like, they like to argue about this, there's some group of people that think that because it's not in the DSM, so just think of the DSM as like the encyclopedia of all the disorders and conditions you can ever have. This is what psychologists, psychiatrists look at. Because it's not in that book or that manual, some people will like to say that imposter syndrome isn't a real thing. And I'm like, why would you do that? Like, it is absolutely something that has been observed time and time again. And it's something that affects more than 70% of the population. Now, one of the other weird things that I have heard recently is that for some strange reason, people think it only happens to people in the US, and that's also absolutely not true. So lots of weird ideas of this floating around. And the third misconception that I would say, and it's probably the biggest, is that people think it only affects women or primarily affects women. It affects people of all types, gender, race, nationality, everyone. It affects everyone. But the reason why people think it only affects women is because back in the day when it was first coined, they only did the study on women, and not just even like women of all types. So I don't know if you know this, but when people like to run studies or they like to run trials or any kind of experiment, usually the easiest people to get into those experiments are college students. So in the earliest like observations, they're not even like an actual scientific study, by the way. So Clance and Imes, they did this. It was more like, I forget what you would, I don't even know how you would classify this, but it's not even like a scientific method type of study that they conducted. All the people they gathered, and like, I think 70% of them were college students. And since it was back in that day, right, like you said, 1978, in the 1970s, we're talking, they're all white women, not just women. And they were all probably around the age of 20, like in that 70% group. They threw in some other people into the batch. Like, there were some teachers, there were some other people who may have been clients of either Clance or Imes. So you see what I mean? Like, the initial data set was very, like, it wasn't like a wide sample.
Right. That makes sense. And also, too, going back to people not thinking it exists, I can remember maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, some people outside of the country didn't think ADHD existed. So there's that too. I remember, like, in France a long time ago, I read an article saying, oh, kids in France don't have ADHD. It's a made up thing. Well, here we are, so I want to put that in there.
Yeah. And there's another weird thing too with ADHD. So for the longest time, people felt that if you had ADHD, you couldn't have autism, and vice versa, which is also strange because now I think in the last handful of years, there's actually a realization that there's a pretty heavy overlap between those two, like at least 20%, if not more. But
Right.
I think we forget that like all of the conditions or the labels that we're putting onto these things, like we constructed those. So like we constructed some sort of system and then we say like if you have one, you can't have the other, or you don't really have that. And I'm like, uh I don't think this is like we're losing sight of the goal here, which is to help people understand their experiences better.
Right. 100%. Why do you think imposter syndrome occurs?
Well, there are many sources. So if you grew up like me, or Asian American, you're the kid of immigrants, or you are the immigrant, you come to a different country and there is this pressure to fit in. There's this pressure to somehow prove yourself. And I remember my dad telling me, it's not enough to be just a little bit better. You have to be 5 times better to prove that we deserve to be here. So you're carrying all this weight of the expectations of your culture, your family, society. But then you have other factors such as basically if you are different in any shape or form from the group you're entering, whether that's work or your church group or your friend group, if you're different in any way, whether it's in your background, like how you look, or it's in your background of maybe you came from a poor family and all your friends are rich, or vice versa. Maybe you're the only LGBTQ supporter in your group. Maybe you're the only Democrat in your group. Any difference can start to trigger these feelings of these people are going to think that I don't really know what I'm doing. They're going to think that I'm not capable, that I don't belong here, and they're going to discover me. And then the unspoken bit that always kills us is, and then they're going to throw me out of the group. So it kind of depends on sources. Now, there's a new perspective, like a lot of the discussion in the mainstream has shifted. So I think there's an article on HBR that says stop telling women they have imposter syndrome when it's really systemic racism or systemic bias. I agree. Sometimes, it's not really the fact that it's about you. It's about the fact that you've entered an environment where they've created all these conditions. And so I think the example in that article is pretty shocking. There's a black woman, and in her company, I forget what the company did, but they were going to have Barack Obama come to give a keynote. And the company, I think, didn't have a lot of diversity. They put this black woman on like the welcoming committee or like I forget what her position was, but she was in charge of coordinating this whole visit. And I was like, okay, is it because she's black and Barack Obama is black? Is this why? Like, I don't know if you've ever seen this thing of you have one black friend and then you meet another black friend and you're like, hey, do you know this other black friend? Like, you two should meet because you'll get along great. And I think maybe that's kind of what goes on in the workplace a lot of the times. But in the workplace, in that specific example I just gave you with the story, you can go look it up. Whatever she was doing, for some reason, the people at her workplace, they didn't like, and they started to say that she wasn't meeting expectations, she wasn't meeting the bar, and they kept essentially like chopping down her role until one of them eventually just took over the role instead. So you have a case like that where there's something else going on in the background. And I have no doubt that she was good at her job, but there are other tensions at play. So it can be your family, it can be society, it can be the fact that, hey, if you're a woman, you're going into a tech job. Most of the tech roles are filled by men, right? STEM. This is why the discussion around STEM is so big. And then if you just look historically, women have not been in the workforce for all that long. Like, you think about it, women started to go into the workforce around the 1950s, but primarily more like the 1970s and 80s. That's when women really started to enter the workforce. So historically, we haven't been out there as like the breadwinner or the person having, the high positions for that long. So you generally don't hear a woman say, I have imposter syndrome about doing the laundry, but you'll hear a woman say this about their job all the time.
Yeah, well said. You said some really good points. It makes sense. It can come from different parts of, our lives. And what you brought up, the thing about women, is also pretty accurate. It makes sense too. Okay, so can you list some common signs of imposter syndrome?
So if you find yourself in the habit of brushing off compliments, that's like a subtle sign. And this is where most women will confuse that for being humble. And I'll just tell you now, like, that is not being humble. For someone to give you a compliment and for you to brush it aside or dismiss it or downplay it tends to go hand in hand with people who might be experiencing imposter syndrome. So for instance, if I tell you, hey, Vaughn, you have done such a great job with your podcast, and then you tell me this, like, I just got lucky. That's one of the most common phrases I hear from people who experience imposter syndrome. So they constantly think that they got lucky. And I'm like, you think you got lucky with every job you've ever gotten? Like, how many times will it take you to stop saying that? I had a friend one time. She didn't really know what imposter syndrome was. She thought, like how a lot of people do, that it means that you are an imposter. And we got on the subject because she was talking about the fact that she didn't work. Like, I had known this woman for a couple of years, and I noticed she always seemed to have free time. And I was like, does this woman have a job? And so one day I finally asked her, I was like, do you work? And she was like, no, she has passive income from real estate. And I was like, well, shit, that's amazing. And then she's like, oh, no. Like, I just got lucky. I was just in the right place at the right time. I promise you it wasn't that hard. And I remember thinking, like, WTF? Like, seriously? That's your response? And I dug in with her a little bit here. So I was like, okay, so tell me, like, what all did this involve? And she tells me that she studied the real estate market for over a year. It took her, I don't know, at least 5 years to save up the initial capital to invest. And then the timing seemed to align, and she invested in a couple of properties. And it's from the passive income from those properties that today, that's where she gets all her money. She doesn't have a job. And I was like, so you just told me you spent over 5 years saving up your money and you spent over a year studying the market, and you think that was luck? Do you even hear yourself? She's like, no, I was just in the right place at the right time. And I reached this point where I was like, why are you arguing so hard to say that you didn't really do anything special? And this is what a lot of women do, or a lot of people with imposter syndrome.
I like how you talked about some people might pass it off as being humble. Can you, in your definition, what is a definition of being humble? Because to me, I feel like you can't be like too braggadocious. You can't you don't want to be that person that seems like, thinks that it's shit to a degree, so you kind of try to not minimize your accomplishments, but you're kind of modest about it. I don't know if that comes from culture, right? But can you talk about maybe the difference between or can you talk about what being humble is, and why is it different from imposter syndrome?
Well, being humble, I think where the confusion comes in is that people think that to be confident means you're not humble, and that is not the definition of humble. So being humble basically means that you see the full reality of who you are. You see your strengths and your flaws. Okay, so it's everything. You see what you do well. You recognize that you do these things well, but you also recognize that there's room for growth. You recognize that there are things you could do better. You recognize you have weaknesses, like we all do. And you accept that about yourself, and the messages you communicate outwardly displays that. So people are very afraid of confidence, and what they're really afraid of is being arrogant. So let me give you an example. The difference between being arrogant and being humble, which is, to me, is really just another shade of being confident. The arrogant person will say something like, I did all this by myself. I didn't need any help. I never needed to ask for any help. It was just all me, even though that wasn't true. No one in this world has ever done anything all by themselves, or they haven't done everything all by themselves. So this person is dismissing the fact that they have received help. They're not acknowledging that help. And then they're leveraging that. The way they're communicating is as if they're somehow better than other people. That's what gets people. Okay. So this is not being confident, and it is not being humble. So humble, like the essence of humility is to communicate like, yeah, I did this, but without positioning it as if you're better or superior to other people. So let's say, somebody compliments me on being an executive coach. And I say, yeah, like I've had a lot of help along the way. I've had mentors, and I was able to leverage their lessons and move those forward. I was able to propel that into momentum for myself. I've learned my own lessons along the way. And so that doesn't diminish the contributions I've received from other people. And I'm also not saying that I'm somehow above or better than others. Like, can you see the difference?
Yeah, I can see the difference. I don't know. Recently, I think for a long time I had trouble accepting compliments. I'm not sure if it was imposter syndrome or it was just I wasn't really confident about myself. So now I'm getting better at saying thank you, or thank you, I work hard at it, or I've been at it for a while, and I really like what I do when it comes to like podcasting and music. But yeah, it's something I realized I have an issue with. I don't know why, but yeah.
Well, you just said it, right? Culture. The Asian culture really hasn't taught us how to set ourselves up for success. Like they really haven't. And in fact, I remember one of my clients, she lives in Malaysia. She said to say thank you would mean like you have a big head. Like you have to argue over receiving the compliment, like how Asians argue over who's going to pay for the check. Like you fight over the bill when it comes. It's a lot like that. So there's this idea that to just receive a compliment means that you're arrogant or you got a big head. And that there is already like a huge problem. We're not really taught how to gracefully receive the compliment and to help the other person also feel seen and heard. So one of the things that I don't think we ever think about on the subject of compliments is there's a weird self-centeredness to rejecting the compliment. Like we're only thinking about ourselves. We're not thinking about the fact that the other person has seen something and has offered us this gift. Like they have seen something in us that they want to celebrate. And so here they are, they want to share that feeling with us by offering us this gift. And then we just basically swat it away, which if you think about it, like, have you ever tried to offer a compliment to someone and had someone that like do that to you?
Yeah.
How did it make you feel?
Kind of shot down.
Exactly. And I remember talking to my ex. This is after we had broken up. I offered him a compliment about something. I can't remember. Maybe it was the book he was writing, or, it could have been any number of things. He's a good guy. And he was doing exactly what we're talking about. He's like, no, like blah, blah, blah. I'm not so good at this, or I'm just a dumb guy, blah, blah, blah. And he has like a very like Eeyore type of personality, which I can't stand anymore in people. It's like, I don't have time for that. But that's what he was doing. And I remember being super frustrated. And I was like, well, if that's how you're going to be, then I'm just not going to offer you compliments anymore because it's a waste of my breath.
Right. I also believe that there's like good compliments and kind of like rude compliments. I'm talking in terms of like how, not to be stereotypical, but like a guy might compliment a woman in a very inappropriate way, or like in a condescending way or something like that. So I think there is that too. We have to be mindful of.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so can we talk about that a little bit?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so there's what I call the backhanded compliment, which I think we've all seen. As a woman, one of the ones, because I was recently watching The Good Wife. Have you ever seen that show?
Nope.
Do you like legal dramas?
I do. I like Legally Blonde. Is that
Okay.
is that a legal drama? Oh, is it kind of like is it kind of like wait, I think wait, have we talked about this? Wait, is it kind of like CSI? Is that a legal drama?
I think CSI, the shows like that one, it has a component of legal, but it's more about forensics, right? Like it's more like what I would say is a police or medical lab crime scene drama. So legal dramas, I'm talking about stuff like Suits or The Good Wife, The Good Fight. I think there's also a show called Elspeth. So 3 of those shows I just mentioned are all in the same universe of legal drama. Like it's the same story with spinoffs. And what makes The Good Wife so special is, well, I'm not going to get into that right now, but I was recently watching one of the episodes, and there's this scene where the mom, Alicia, is talking to her daughter, and she's asking her daughter for some insights because she's on a case that involves Christian stuff, so the Christian religion, and her daughter is a Christian. So she goes to her daughter and she's looking for her daughter to help her find passages in the Bible that will help support her case. And her daughter says like a bunch of stuff, and it's really neat. And then her mom turns to her and goes, "Wow, did you think of that all by yourself?" And her daughter's like, "Yeah, mom, geez, you don't have to sound so surprised." And because the mom is like, "That was so smart." And that's the kind of backhandedness I'm talking about. So people have said that sort of thing to me all the time. And I'm like, I wonder why. You probably have gotten that sort of comment too, I bet. I'm already guessing from people's prejudging from stereotypes, they might think the same exact kind of thing about you.
Yeah, I've had a couple of those thrown at me. I didn't realize what I didn't realize it was kind of a backhanded compliment until later on, but yeah, I can definitely resonate with those.
Yeah. Now, there's the other kind of what I would say is the condescending one. Like the backhanded one is already condescending, but then there's the other kind of compliment where it's not really a compliment. And let me give you an example. I was recently reviewing someone's sales call. So this is someone who's trying to sell his services to someone else. And he asked her who designed this website, and she goes, "I did." And there's this pause, and he says, "Well, you did an awesome job." But then where the conversation went, he at one point says, "Think of it like a relay race. And, you've started the race, and now it's time to, like, you've run your little heart out, and now it's time to hand over the baton." And I was like, I had issue with the run your little heart out. Like, what was that? And then later on in the same conversation, he goes on to say, she asked him, like, "Will I still have the website if I stop having you manage my website? Will I still have it?" She clearly has some concern. And he then comes back with, "Well, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it because you're not the expert." So you see what I mean? Like the tone throughout the conversation, it has certain what I call condescension markers. And it's like, why do you feel the need to say that? If you think they did a good job, then just say that. If you think they put in a lot of work, then just say that. But some people have a communication style where they throw in these little zingers with it, It's like if I were to say, "Wow, you did so much with your podcast," I wouldn't have expected it from someone like you. It's like, well, what the F did that mean?
Yeah. It's yeah, I agree. No, it's weird. My psychiatrist said something yesterday that kind of like, I don't know. It was kind of like, I'll break it down. So pretty much I told her I was seeing a friend from college, and, "Oh, cool. All right. What did you take?" I told her my degree, Asian American studies. And she goes, "Okay, how do you apply it?" I'm like, "Well, I apply it to my podcast, my music, work at Trader Joe's, it's pretty cool. And she goes like, you don't want to do anything else? I'm like, anything with it? I'm like, what do you mean? I told her that. I'm like, what did you mean by that? Like, when you said that, I felt kind of like, oh no, just asking what you do, because typically people with degrees tend to do something with that field. I'm like, yeah, I told you I'm doing with podcasting and music and everything. And I'm happy. Oh, okay, as long as you utilize it. So that was, the people pleaser in me didn't want to say anything, but then I just was like, you know what? I want to be straight up. Like, what did you mean by that? So I'm getting better at saying no and just kind of standing up. Like, I'm pretty sure it was innocuous, but for me, it was kind of like, I told you what I'm doing with it. Like, tell me more. Why'd you say that?
I am so glad you spoke up because I think the way she said that, even if she didn't mean it, like it was coming across like you're not doing enough with it. And then, by the way, she's completely wrong. Most people are not working in the fields of their degree. Like, look at me.
Right. Yeah. So, and also, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this term I'm going to say now. You're also a dating coach. You're familiar with negging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like for those who don't know, that's you give a backhanded compliment to a person, typically a woman, to get them to like engage with you. Does not work. It's not cool. Don't recommend it. But I'm sure that I think that's another term for that backhanded compliment in those terms. Also, too, there's like compliments that are not appropriate, and some guys will just take the compliment already. And I think there's different layers to that.
If we could totally go down that road. It's your choice. I do think that guys, they don't understand that a lot of times that the compliments they offer to women are based on our appearance. And if that's all you ever hear as the woman, you start to think, is that the only value I have? You know? It's like, because that's all I'm ever hearing, even from my own parents. They compliment me all the time on how I look. They tell me all the time very quickly if they don't like how I look. But there's very little commentary on anything I'm actually doing. So even like if we're talking about compliments, there's like a right way and a wrong way to do this. So the idea is that you don't compliment them something about themselves that they don't have control over. You compliment them on something they put the effort in. That's when the compliment is most appreciated.
I like how you phrase that. I never thought of it that way. I just didn't know how to like word it, but well worded. It's also sometimes guys like, oh, she's stuck up because I complimented her and she just kind of like, I don't know, didn't take the compliment. She's stuck up. You know what?
It's so funny how people start spinning up all this drama, the stories. And again, though, right, it kind of points back to what we were saying earlier is that when you offer a compliment and someone doesn't receive it, it does leave you feeling not great. And it's like, what do you do with that? If I ignore a compliment from you, you're probably not going to feel great. And then the question is like, what do you do with that? Sometimes you're like me where sometimes even Lynn, our mutual friend Lynn, I remember one time, this was like several years ago, she said something and I was still in the habit of just dismissing the compliment. And she was like, would you just take the compliment, woman? Just take it. And I remember being a little bit like, what? I was like, okay, that was weird to me, but now I can see why she said that. So not everyone is going to be as forceful as she is.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Lynn, if you're listening. Also, too, I talked to her about a week ago, and I was telling her I was going through some things and I had a hard time with dealing with discomfort. And right there, she said, no, that's not true. You've been through a lot. Don't say that to yourself. Don't sell yourself short. So yeah, she's definitely like interrupted my thought process with that, which is good. Um, so yeah, oh man, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, this was a good conversation about the compliments and everything and whatnot. I think looking back to the reason I kind of like really like downplayed my compliments, I think when I was a lot younger, I was obviously on drugs. And I think I was more like arrogant and just like on a different mindset. And I did say a lot of things that or really out there. I think I thought highly of myself more than I should. And when a lot of things happened, I was humbled. I, yeah, a lot of things happened preceding that kind of stuff, and I was humbled. And for a long time, I was just like, kind of through like, I felt like as a sort of like redemption or penance, like I be mindful of like how I view myself as when people give me compliments. But I think I'm over that phase now where I can accept compliments and not feel like, oh man, when you were younger, you were saying some like really wild shit, and you shouldn't accept this compliment now, if that makes sense.
Oh my God, that makes a lot of sense because I think what you're talking about is you're almost trying to make up for the past. And that also, the other person across from you probably isn't going to have that context. So for you to do it for that reason would make zero sense to them. And we do a lot of things like this. We're reacting to stuff in the past instead of the present moment, or we're reacting to something in the future, which is really because of our past, because we don't want something to happen. So we're trying to sort of do a preemptive strike.
Yeah. And also too, I really dislike arrogant people or that characteristic. So I think to myself, when I get these compliments, I'm like, well, what should I say? Maybe if I say this, I might come off as arrogant. Maybe I should kind of downplay it. But after your explanation, I can see I can have a middle ground response to compliments or just acceptance and say, thanks, thank you. I work hard. I appreciate it. I've been doing this for a while. Thank you. But I'm still struggling to accept compliments, but I'm getting a little better at it.
Yeah. Too, what I think you sort of touched upon when you were talking about your history is what makes people arrogant is not just that they're positioning themselves as if they're better, above, or superior to other people. It usually comes coupled hand in hand with this tendency to put other people down, right? So it's not just like I'm saying I'm better than you. It's like I'm saying I'm better than you because you're a lazy piece of shit. There tends to be that kind of pairing together, which is why people don't like arrogant people.
Right. Okay. So I saw on your Instagram that there are different types of imposter syndrome. Could you go over those types for us?
Number one, you have the perfectionist, which I think a lot of us are familiar with. But the way that the mainstream uses the term perfectionist isn't quite correct. So maybe this is a little bit of a meta moment where you're being a perfectionist about the term perfectionist. But generally, when we say perfectionist in the mainstream, we just mean somebody who has high standards or like really high standards. And being a perfectionist literally means you will not accept anything less than 100%. So in the perfectionist imposter syndrome type, or what I like to call it, is it's more like a manifestation, okay? Of the 5 types, when you experience imposter syndrome, your behavior is likely to manifest in one of these 5 ways, and sometimes a combination. So don't think it's just only one. I've had so many people ask me, can you be all 5 or can you be more than one? I'm like, absolutely. The way you handle these imposter feelings will often have more than one, type in here. So the perfectionist imposter syndrome type, they set extremely high and very unrealistic expectations. Like I said, their work has to be 100% perfect every time. So to get 99% feels like a failure. Their eyeballs will not be looking at, hey, I hit 99%. That's pretty freaking good. In their head, the track is more like they're focused all on that missing 1%. And like, why did I F this up? Why didn't I get this? I always do this. I'm such a failure. That's the story that tends to run. So they will obsess and ruminate over the mistakes and in their mind, the missed goals. So again, 99% means they miss a goal. Because of all of this, they can be a nightmare to work with. They're usually a micromanager. Who do you know in your life that's like this?
Uh, I don't want to point fingers. I can't point any at the moment, but I will say I was like this for a while when it came to recording music, I I feel like I had to have like everything perfect. And looking back, I think I was just scared to start. I think I was scared to fail. So I kept telling myself, "Oh, it's not the right beat, or it's not the right thing. I want this, this, and this, so I can have this." But I never really started. I think because I was scared to fail, or scared that I would look bad.
100%. This is a lot of creatives. And so the saying, I don't know if you've ever heard it, is that fear has many faces. Gary Vaynerchuk once put out a post. You haven't heard that?
No, but it's interesting. Like I can see how it'd be right.
Yeah. And I remember once there was this post that Gary V put out, Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you have ever followed his content, but he wrote something like, "You're not a perfectionist, you're just scared."
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, "Damn, that hurts."
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. A lot of times I am scared, so I guise it under the perfection that this has to be right. All the conditions have to be right for me for this because I want to put this out. I want it to be great when honestly, I was scared. I was scared of I had really unrealistic expectations and I was more focused on the outcome and not the process. I was scared of the process.
Well, let me ask you this question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But let's take this a step further. If you were scared of what?
Scared of, was I scared? I think I was just scared of starting. I think I was scared of noticing I have a writer's block. I can't do this. I can't write this song. I've had it happen before. And it's really frustrating, where like I'm writing a recording and it just doesn't go the way I planned it. And I get so frustrated and, or that like maybe I'm so behind compared to my other peers that they're doing this or doing that. And I'm not at that level. We all kind of started in this, around the same time or we met each other at the same time. And we're just, I see stuff they're doing and I'm like, man, I can't, I want to do this. But then in my head, it's like, I'm just, up front, sometimes it's tough for me to write songs, to write music. I was so used to just doing impromptu freestyle stuff. So that was like a learning curve for me. And I was just scared of like, man, sitting at looking at my, piece of paper and a pen, just, listening to the same beat and nothing is coming out. I'm like, damn, I can't do this. So that's what I was scared of, I think. And as I said in previous episodes, this led to like a excuse to use drugs, right? Oh, maybe if I get high or whatever, I can come up with some like really cool ideas. And sometimes I do. Sometimes it unlocks that like, I don't know, that creative flow or whatever, that creative state. But the thing is with you it's kind of like a habit, like, oh, in order for me to create, I have to be under the influence. And it's not a very healthy pattern in the long run. And with addiction issues, it can be a real problem to a point where like I've definitely done in the past where I say, oh yeah, I'm going to create, I get high. I don't even create, man. I do something totally different. I kind of just get sidetracked. And then I feel bad. And then the cycle starts over again.
Hmm. Well, I think you just described like a full-on cycle of what tends to happen to people when they don't find a healthy way to deal with these feelings. But let's rewind a second and go back to the point where you said that your friends are doing it and then you feel like you can't. So take this a step further and explain, if you can't do it, what does that mean? What does that say about you?
If I can't do it, I can't stand up. I can't live up to this name of being an artist that I have labeled myself for. Now it's like 20 something years, you know? So there's definitely that fear of like, I guess, not being exposed or just saying, oh, look at this person fell off. That's pretty common in my head sometimes.
Okay, so we could keep going down this road, right? Which is essentially, and then what? And then what? And then what? But you've already, I think, figured out like a big chunk of it. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I guess I feel like I would have done it for nothing. Or I feel like I'd be one of those people where, you always see like stuff on VH1, like back then, who we watch. I mean, I don't know who watches VH1 now, but there's like behind the music or like life after so and so. And you see these people that are like artists that were like big ones, right? And then it's kind of like their life went down a spiral. And as an artist, you're like, damn, I don't want to be that person. But then I saw myself being that person where I was, maybe not creating at the time. I spiraled into like using drugs and alcohol. And I was always like looking back at the good old days. I'm like, man, I remember back then I was doing this and that. And I remember I never wanted to be that person. And I saw myself be that person and it scared me.
I feel like every creative who listens to this episode will resonate with what you said, because that's one of the hallmarks of imposter syndrome, hitting the creative community harder than maybe some of the other industries, because there's this feeling that you're only as good as your last work was. Even if you've accomplished all this other amazing stuff, you only ever seem to measure your success and your self-worth by your last thing you did. So it's this pressure to keep performing and to keep up and to keep producing. And this is what makes it pretty pressured. It's like, it's not a good feeling, right? Like you feel like you got to keep on the treadmill.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Like, sorry. Yeah, it's been a while. Last thing I put out was in February. It's been a while. So, I'm getting that feeling a little bit, but I got to remind myself, like, life happens and, yeah.
There's this book. I think you might like it. I don't know if you listen to audiobooks or you like to read books, but there's this book called I Didn't Do the Thing Today, or I Didn't Do the Thing, something like that. And it talks about it, right? Like it's ebbs and flows, and you learn to surf when you can. And when you can't, you don't sit there and beat yourself up, because this is a part of life. Like we're not robots. We're not machines that just produce on command. That's not how creativity works. Like we can try to get there. But I think what makes it really hard is when we start to tell ourselves we can't do this. And then it's like you start stacking bricks on top of yourself. It makes it a lot harder to get back into it. The perfectionist one too, by the way, is the one that most people identify with. Like, even though I don't really see myself as a perfectionist, there are some pieces here and there.
What's the difference, do you think, from being a perfectionist and the pursuit of excellence?
So this is something that a lot of people, especially creatives, or just people who desire to be better, they tend to get confused about. So very similar to like being humble versus confident. It's a similar relationship. Now, they share similar characteristics, right? Perfectionism and pursuit of excellence. There is a desire to constantly improve and to get better. But the problem is the underlying energy is very different. So remember I said the perfectionist comes from this energy of, if I don't make 100%, then I fucked up. So the entire focus on that missing 1%, this is why I say perfectionism is the pursuit of the absolute worst within us. It's the voice inside of us that says, you didn't get it all the way right. You fucked up. You failed. You are a failure. Versus the pursuit of excellence. Like I said, it also wants to always, get better. You desire to better yourself. You desire to acquire more skills and to gain more expertise. But what makes it different is that you're able to see that where you are in your journey is good enough. So you can ask for more. You can hope for more. You can hope to be better while recognizing that what you have and where you are in the moment is good enough. And so the perfectionist would never say good enough, because if you don't hit perfection, then you're automatically not good enough. And in one of the examples I like to give to people, I'll say, think of yourself outlining, like taking notes on a piece of paper. You're at a lecture or you're at a seminar or something where you're taking notes. The perfectionist has to take notes perfectly. So let's say they scribble a little bit weird or they write something wrong. That's the person who will just rip out the paper and start over. So one of the key things here is there's a constant starting over with perfectionism or never getting started. So you're not actually moving forward because of this fear that you're going to be a failure if you don't hit perfect. Now, the pursuit of excellence will keep going. So that's, again, like another key differentiator. You keep going. You make mistakes and you keep going.
Right. Also, something too, I thought about perfectionism while you were speaking on it. Maybe sometimes, I don't know, I just realized this. I don't know. I feel like maybe I thought of this subconsciously. You can't attain perfection and you'll never, so like, it's almost like a form of self-sabotage where like it's the chances of you doing this perfect to your standards might be slim to none. So when you do fail, it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy is, oh, I told, see, look, I, I couldn't do it. I told, like, why did I even try? So it becomes this cycle. And when you fail and you don't take it well, some people have healthier coping mechanisms than others, but maybe I just linked it now. Possibly perfectionism can be linked with self-sabotage.
It's totally linked with self-sabotage. And if you think about what you just said, it's a tendency to always look at what you don't have instead of what you do have. So when people are falling down these holes, and it's one of my clients, that's literally the thing that I tell them. Because you don't want to argue on the fact that being perfect is better. Like, of course, having a perfect result is better than not perfect. But that's not the point. Like, you're totally missing the point. Like, the fact is, it's like, what has you continually looking at what you don't have instead of looking at what you do have? Because at the end of the day, if you are thinking and saying things to yourself that make you feel like a piece of crap, it's going to be that much harder for you to go out and want to do anything, let alone try the same thing again.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And I tell myself, remind myself, like with podcasting and music, that, yeah, there's some days where I feel like I don't live up to this unrealistic expectation in my head. And I got to tell myself, like, hey, you've been doing this for a while. Maybe people you're comparing yourself to, they have more resources in terms of finance, or maybe this is like their full-time job. This is not your full-time job. So I try to put logic into it. Like, why are you feeling like this? Is it because of the lack of views and all that? And that could be algorithm. It doesn't have anything to do with the quality of your content. It's just algorithm, social media stuff. And I don't know. I feel like I'm realizing now that I have a finite amount of energy. When I was younger, I was like, oh, fuck it. Let's get fucked up, get home at 3 a.m., work at 9 a.m. Everything's fine. But when older now, it's like, yo, I need like time to chill or just manage my energy better. And I'm realizing a lot of times it's like, I love podcasting. I love making music, but the creating content consistently and having like expectations for it can sometimes discourage me. And sometimes I think to myself, oh, maybe you're not as a good podcaster because you don't get the views or music wise. But then I tell myself, no, you're just really not good with algorithms. There's a difference. And I got to remind myself that. When I remind myself that, I'm like, I'm cool with that.
Yeah. I think you have done a really good job in finding ways to sort of offset that voice in your head. And like the other question I would say, because this is a lot of people, what you described, the comparison trap is real, is for real. Like we tend to look at other people that we think are doing better. And instead of comparing and again, falling down the hole, I would say, what has you looking at what other people are doing? Because that has no relevance to you, right? Like you should just be looking at what you're doing. It's like when we're back at school and the teacher would say, keep your eyes on your own paper. Same thing. Why are you looking at what that other person is doing? you got your own paper to deal with?
I think I do it subconsciously. I mean, I open up social media and you just look at it. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm falling behind kind of thing. When I should just instead say, oh, they're doing a good job. They're doing their thing. For some reason, sometimes in my head, I'm like, damn, they're doing so good. Like, I feel bad. Maybe I'm not like doing that right now. Sometimes it can be motivational sometimes, but a lot of times, not as motivational, but that's just something in my head that I have to work on and maybe rephrase it in my head. Like, hey, maybe you can do this or that, as opposed to saying, damn, I'm really falling behind kind of thing.
That falling behind thing, man. I hear that from everybody I work with. And look, it is human nature to compare, for sure. And then when you see someone doing something so well, it is also natural to feel maybe a little bit worse about yourself. But the goal here is you want to find ways where comparison works for you, like what you just said, where sometimes it's motivating. I'm like, absolutely. Find the people where it inspires you to level up your game from a positive energy, not from a negative, like, oh, I got to keep up and I'm going to fall behind if I don't. Or one of my clients, he's always saying how he feels like he's getting older and he's not meeting like all these check boxes. It's like, that's not the positive energy I'm talking about. It's like, if I see somebody doing something well, I'm like, damn, how they do that? Like, how can I do that? Or how can I do something similar in my own style, in my own vibe? It's like you want to use it for creative inspiration and energy, not to tear yourself down, which is where I think most of us go.
Correct. I think that's all the time we have today. We got so in depth with the perfection thing. I don't want to minimize the other questions and the other types of imposter syndrome, so there'll have to be a part two. So with that said, thank you for your time, Jule. I appreciate it. This is a very good and insightful conversation. I was learning a lot of things coming into it. Honestly, I don't think I knew the full definition of imposter syndrome until you mentioned it. So now I'm like, oh, okay. I learned something today.
Well, thank you, Vaughn. I hope I didn't talk your ear off. I promise the next part two will be more balanced.
No, I like this. You're pretty knowledgeable with this subject, and I'm just here to listen, and so is the audience.
Well, thank you so much for having me on again.
You're welcome. All right. That is it. Everybody have a good rest of your day. Stay tuned for part two.